Hi again, everybody. Welcome into another edition, another week. This is Cross Functionality. Thank you for joining us. As always, the show connecting coaching, baseball, softball, male, female, hosted by former college baseball and softball players. Thank you for joining us once again. Episode 58 today. I couldn't do it alone. Let me bring in my friend and co-host, softball national champion at the University of Alabama, current day renowned coach. Right now, I'm guessing at the academy.
Yes, we're at work today.
The whiteboard is all filled up with notes. Ready to go. I need a big whiteboard like that. You know, I write down like show notes or like things that I might want to talk about on like a little note card. I need like a big whiteboard. And put it in like one of the spare bedrooms, and just like anytime a note comes to my head, I can just
add it
the marker and write out these. By the way, I have to ask you, being a Yankees fan, and this has been talked about. I don't know, since Wednesday, right? When did the Phillies clinch? When was it? Wednesday, whatever it was. The Yankees missing out on the Bryce Harper sweepstakes, and that video of his interview, I think it was with Barstool, one of the affiliates of Barstool a few years ago, him talking about how the Yankees never reached out to him, and I just have to wonder, get it from the perspective of a Yankees fan, how you feel about Bryce Harper, and did they really miss out, the Yankees, on signing Bryce? Because look, you can't deny, I'm not for that amount of money that he got paid. Not money for any player, quite frankly, but that's just me. I'm all about development, you know that. But do you think the Yankees missed out? What are your thoughts on Bryce Harper? I have to know.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, if you would have asked me, I'm trying to think when he came into the league, I would have been a little
2012.
Right. Okay. So it was right around when I was in college, getting into college, and I just remember he had so much hype from being so young. Like, he was at, I think, a JUCO, and I don't know. To me, like, I guess back then I would have been like, okay, do you risk that much? I mean, granted, like, how many times does someone who's hyped up so much at such a young age actually pan out? And obviously he has. But what I do appreciate about him is just how much he seems to care and love baseball. And I think a lot of like that comes out. So as I'm torn, because as someone who grew up watching the Yankees in the 90s, obviously baseball in general is just a little different now. You don't have a Jorge Posada or a Jeter or like those guys coming up through the farm system, let's say, that are producing as we got to see in the 90s, I guess. But
yeah,
who knows? It's hindsight's 2020, right?
Oh yeah, it's a great point. The one thing I'll say, and it kind of ties into today's topic, we're talking about breaking the myth of playing with heart. And when you play with I think one of my points I'm going to make today is when you play with too much heart, you're putting more pressure on yourself. And he was talking on the Pat McAfee show this week, Bryce Harper, about how all that pressure of being 16 years old, dropping out of high school, having to go to JUCO, play against players that were way older than him, and maturity-wise anyway, and getting drafted number 1 overall, all that pressure of being this phenom. Right. He says that all that's behind him now. I'm just worried about my family, and I'm worried about being able to support them, take care of them, and playing baseball now, as he put it, is just kind of a piece of cake. That kind of encapsulates everything we're going to talk about today, and the whole breaking the whole myth of playing with heart. I mean, he plays with the heart, but he does it the right way. And there's an important lesson in there to be able to, and it comes with maturity, I think, with all athletes.
I was just going to say that, yeah.
In general. But it's being able to conceptualize what pressure really is, and then being able to attack that pressure the right way and go about it the right way mentally.
Yeah, for sure. And you know what? When you talk about maturity, I don't think because I follow baseball, but not nearly as in-depthly as I might follow softball, let's say. But I did see a clip recently of Bryce Harper at the Little League World Series, and he's in the booth and he's being interviewed, and he got all choked up talking about his kids and how much he misses out on their lives, and how that is really his focus, like what you just mentioned. And so it's interesting because you see that level of maturity, then it makes sense why my timeline doesn't show up with like maybe videos of him like looking back at a fan anymore, or yelling at another player from the opposing team. Or I feel like I used to see that pop up every now and then on my timeline in regards to Bryce Harper, and now it seems like a very different, polished athlete who has figured out how to hone in that heart and hone in that passion and what he brings to the table, so that it is going in the right direction and not just bursting out of him at uncontrollable times, let's say.
Yeah, I looked at that series with the Braves, and it goes to your point. The Phillies were more of a, maybe not, they may not have been the better team on paper, but they were the more grown-up team. And I think that starts, in a room filled with the guys like Reilly-Boccia and Castellanos and Schwarber, all of these guys who are mature and are getting older in their careers, have had that experience. That group is led by Bryce Harper, who is, you can say he's not the best player in the Phillies. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. I'm not going to go into that debate. I don't care, quite frankly, but you can say he is the leader of that group because of all of the things, all of the elements that were around him as he was growing up. And some of those quote unquote mistakes that he may have made, yelling at an opposing player, yelling at a fan, whatever, it doesn't really matter to me, but some people it does. He's the leader of that group, that grown-up group, and that's how I think he led the Phillies to once again beat the Braves, who, by the way, were outplayed, I think. And how many innings did they play in that series? They played, 4 games? So that's 36 innings. The Braves were probably outplayed 30 of those 36 innings. And I think it's because the Phillies are more of a grown-up team, and in essence, that grown-up team is led by Bryce Harper.
Yeah, having thankfully been a part of a championship team in college, but even in high school, even in travel ball, you just start to recognize, and it's whatever you want to call it, right? Like you could do a whole podcast on people saying like, oh, they have it, or that team has it. And you're like, yeah, what is it? But it shows up. It's on full display during playoffs, because I think that is when that professionalism is called upon so much. And teams or athletes will reach that breaking point where it's like, all right, have you been here? Can you manage your emotions? Or are you going to fall off this tightrope of managing your emotions and be too high, be too low, whatever it may be. So those emotionally mature teams, the professional approach to failure teams, the just like hardened from previous experience, whatever you want to call it, they have it, and it shows up big time come playoffs for sure.
So when you were in college and you were a senior and you guys were bidding for that national championship, did you feel more buttoned up, more like a grown-up team at that point? Or at least did you feel like you could sit in the room with 3 or 4 other girls, 3 or 4 other teammates, and you guys could be the grown-ups of that room and lead that team? It almost, meaning you almost felt like, well, we've been here before, we've been there before, let's act like we've been there.
For sure. And honestly, we had taking a professional approach to the entire season was something that we wanted from the very start of the season, but it just kind of really came to fruition. So the World Series happens. We look around. We're like, okay, we graduated 2 girls last year. Every single person on this field was on this field last year. A quarter of them were on the field 3 years ago. So of course, experience matters. And of course, having been battle tested and gone through all that matters. And what the difference is, of course you're excited to go to the World Series, but you're not like, we're at the World Series. It's like, yeah, we're here and we're ready to win. It was a very different type of excitement that came with it. So to our point today with, it's not that there isn't excitement or there isn't emotion. It is just a very different refined emotion.
Yeah, people don't realize, and that's okay if they don't. They don't realize though, and this is why I think some players maybe struggle after they get traded to another team, during the trade deadline, during the season. The little things do matter, like the way the place, walking into the ballpark, where you walk into the ballpark, or I don't know if they call ballparks in softball. Stadium. Okay.
Yeah.
Walking into the stadium, like for example, you guys in your senior year walk into the stadium for a national championship, just kind of that familiarity does actually help a little bit. And being familiar, it relaxes you a little bit. You're not as wide-eyed, wide-eyed and bushy-tailed. You're not as wide-eyed as you would be, say, 3 years ago when you were a freshman, 2 years ago when you were a sophomore going to the national championship.
Yeah, for sure. And you know what? I think the difference too is like, I remember freshman year we were there and because we were so wide-eyed, it almost like put this pressure on us where it was like we had to do it because we were here, and it almost was like a little bit of a lack of confidence in how we got there, because maybe to your point, like we got away with like being really, really emotional and getting some of these wins to get there, which is fine. But then it almost like made us lose confidence in like, okay, well, do we know how to get here again? Can we get here? Whereas, so that's like 1, not being in the present. That's 2, allowing emotions to dictate your presence instead of letting your presence dictate your emotions. And it certainly led to us putting way too much pressure on every single game, on every single moment, instead of just being like, okay, we've been here before and this is how we navigated, and nothing is too big of a deal. Nothing is too little of a deal. Just it is what it is, and you move on.
Yeah, and you don't really romanticize the small things about, oh, look at this locker room. This is cool. Look at this chair I can sit in. This is cool. Look at this backdrop. Look at this hitter's eye. This is all cool. You're just not as wide-eyed anymore. It's just an experience at this point.
You can certainly appreciate it, and you can certainly be, there is that balance. But I think it's also too, like, look at want to talk about emotion, look at the Phillies when they celebrate afterwards. That was when they could finally let go and let loose, and then they'll package it back up and they'll move on to the next series. And look at teams when they finally dogpile, or like how people start crying. It's like, that's when they can finally, like, oh, we can let it go now, because we don't need that professional, like studiness almost to you to really be really be a student of the game, and really be make sure you're not humbled by the game, because I think the second you get too high on those emotions, the game's very quickly there to humble you.
Yeah. Well, let's get into today's topic. Be sure to follow us on social media at Jim Tara, at Coach_CassieRB on Instagram, at Coach CassieRB on Twitter. Today's episode 58. We're breaking the myth of playing with heart. This came from this topic. It derived from when I was in high school. I had a coach who coached his kid. He wasn't the head coach, but he coached his kid who was a year older than me. The only reason, and maybe he ran into this too as a player, but the only reason he was coaching his kid to make sure that his kid got the benefit of the doubt and was well positioned. His kid didn't really go anywhere, but nonetheless, he would always say to us, play with heart. And I never knew what that meant. And now as I've gotten older and I've gotten to establish relationships and friendships with great coaches, anywhere from hitting coaches, pitching coaches, regular overall coaches, I understand that playing with heart is utter nonsense. And here's why, in my opinion, because I think that when you play with too much heart, you go out of body and you don't actually play well, and you let your emotions take over, and you throw away everything that you studied for, all the advanced scouting reports. And we're talking in a baseball and softball sense here. Throw away everything that helped get you there and everything that may help you win information-wise, and of course, just on-field stuff. And that's a problem. So when you play with too much heart, right? Well, I'm going to use that kind of in air quotes. I think that's fair, right? Playing with too much heart, I think that you ultimately, in the end, are hurting yourself, because you're not actually playing smart, and you take the risk as a hitter of getting away from your approach.
Yeah, I think, and certainly the perception of what it means. And I think that's what you just alluded to. And you're saying, okay, I'm putting it in quotes here, because I think to one person, it's, you hear football players playing with heart, and even that they have to manage their emotion. It's the idea that you can't only just play with heart. You can't just have emotion be dictating, especially at those older levels, like everything that you do, right? And to your point, there's so much homework that goes into studying for a pitcher. And if you go up there gripping the bat like crazy, being like, that's it, I don't care where she throws it or he throws it, I'm just going to swing, I'm going to crush this ball, whatever it may be, then all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, what happened to your relaxed swing thought, positive visualizations, knowing you're looking for a middle outside pitch, like, right? You don't want that stuff to go out the window. But when I think of, on the flip side of it, you have athletes sometimes who kind of just like, are kind of just there and showing up, and they're maybe robots, or like they're not diving after a ball that they should have dove after, and maybe they're too in their head that they don't let some of that emotion come through. So it is probably, depending on your perception of it, more like a bell curve, right? Like we have too low, we have too high, and then we have this sweet spot where we could probably operate pretty effectively. But especially in a highly skill-based sport, a very cognitive sport, or just, I guess maybe intellectual is maybe the better word, where you just need to keep your head on your shoulders, to just say like, hey, we're just going to go out there and play with heart and go get them. There's a little bit more to that, obviously.
Well, when you play with heart, again, people think that's diving for balls or running hard down the line. Look, I'm okay, and I'm speaking in a baseball sense here. Softball is a little bit different, because I'm guessing because the field's a little bit smaller. But when you hit a ground ball right at the second baseman, and you're a pro athlete, and you hustle out of the box, but then you slow down a little bit, I'm okay with that. In fact, I prefer that, right? I mean, you hit it right. I mean, I'm talking minor league baseball, professional, Major League Baseball, and you hit it right at somebody. They're the best player. The fielder's one of the best in the world. He's going to field it and throw you out. I mean, so what I'm saying is you risk injury by hustling too hard. You can hustle out of the box, but if the play is halfway over, you can slow down a little bit. I don't mind Acuna when he runs down the line and stops three-quarters of the way to first base. I don't want him hurting himself because it's a long season is what I'm saying. So there's a difference between, again, playing smart, playing with heart. I don't think two go together. I really don't. I think you either have to play smart or play with heart. And if you play with heart, you risk not doing your job correctly.
It's fair. Yeah, I see your point. Yeah, for sure. And I do think, like, to your point too, that professional level, like, these are people who are paid millions upon millions of dollars. And you ask yourself, because that's always the big question. It's like, all right, you have one camp of people who are like, no, they're role models. They need to do what's right all the time. And like you said, hustling out of the box. That's what I don't like is people who just like hang out in the box, see the play happen, and then walk to the dugout. But like hustling out of the box, and then when you see the play's over, it's like, all right, I'm not gonna go kill myself because I'm frustrated maybe, and I'm letting that emotion take over. I will disagree though on a pop fly. On a pop fly, I would disagree on like a pop fly. That is less of a guaranteed. I have seen more professional baseball players mishap on a pop fly, and the guy is not even halfway down first base when he could have been on second. So
that's a little bit different.
It's a little different than the ground ball, right? But again, that's playing some smart. It's a windy day, it's a sunny day, right?
Yeah, so it's part of learning and part of the learning. But I will say this too, when I say like diving for a ball in the outfield, you'll agree with this. You dive at the wrong time, runs could score. I mean, you're not. Again, you play with when you play with too much heart, right? I'm thinking like you have the Rocky music or the Rudy music in the background. I hate that movie, by the way, Rudy. Do you like that movie? I hate that movie.
I never saw Rudy.
Oh well, good for you.
I have seen Rocky.
I hate it. It's so unrealistic.
The Rocky or the Rudy one? Which one?
The Rudy. Rocky's great. I will always fuck with Rocky.
I never got that into Rudy growing up, and our area is big Notre Dame fans. Like the Northeast just has a tendency to Irish. There's Notre Dame fans around. But then when I got to Alabama, and I Alabama football picks up, and I'm like, well, now I'm really not gonna like Rudy because especially Alabama plays Notre Dame in the national championship. So I just I've never seen it, but I will probably be a very biased.
I'm just telling you, people, people when you say play with heart, people have that Rudy music in the background, but it's just it's a farce because if you dive for a ball at the wrong time, both baseball and softball, right, in the outfield, runners at second and third, say, and there's, I don't know how many outs, if there's, I'll make it easy. There's nobody on base, nobody out, line drive hit to you or hit right at you. It's sinking very quickly. Might have some topspin. You dive for it. It gets by you. That's okay. It's not ideal, but that's okay because there's nobody on base and nobody has a chance to score, right? You gave it all out. But if you do that in another situation where runs may score,
right,
and it's a pivotal point in the game, well, guess what? You had some heart there to dive for it, but you were stupid, and now you've allowed runs to score.
Right. Yeah. And you know what? That's probably too. It's I could see someone who is because dial that person back, take them out of college, take them out of high school, put them in middle school. Let's say playing with heart is like, or a situation like that. You realize they haven't developed fully the smarts yet in the sport. So it's like it's probably complemented, right? So then all of a sudden that athlete like associates like, oh, I did something well, but then they've never matured on the smart side. They take that same mentality with them all the way through high school, college, and now they become a little bit of a liability where they're athletic, they're great, they go all out. But to your point, we now are like, so-and-so's in the outfield, let's fingers crossed they're not going to screw something up here. Or, I think an example too is that same outfielder trying to get a runner out at home when there really wasn't a shot to get him out at home, right? So like overshooting your cut because you want so badly to get that out, or throw him from right field to third base, like those types of things too, like I think start to come into play where it's like that emotion got too big and we didn't have the maturity or the smarts to dial it back and say, okay, well, what makes the most sense here?
Yeah. And when it comes to practice too, I want to touch on that point for a second. When it comes to practicing with heart or when coaches say, and again, we're talking amateur coaches here, I'm not talking about real professional coaches, college coaches, right? Top end college. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about, high school coaches and little league coach, whatever. When they say, you guys got to have some heart, you guys had no heart today. Those are the kind of the coaches that I'm aiming at today and sort of teasing, put it lightly. But when it comes to practice, okay, sound like Allen Iverson. When it comes to practice, though, you're not practicing with heart. The definition of practicing, you got to practice the right way. There is no such thing as practicing with heart. You have to practice the right way. And by doing that, you have to be focused and you have to execute. Whether it's doing the small things, practicing double plays, practicing base running, it's doing those small little things. That means a lot more than just practicing with heart, because you can still practice with heart and you could still mentally be out of it and not be locked into where you need to be to get better.
Yeah, and you almost see athletes like leaning on it, where it's like, oh well, okay, well I went all out, and to be honest, it's probably an athlete who really struggles to maintain their smart during a game or something like that, where it's uncomfortable to work out what you're not good at. It's uncomfortable for them to maybe focus a little bit more to try to play that or develop that smartness about them. So they're just going to keep deterring to like, well, I know I'm good at this. I know I've been complimented for this before. I'm going to continue to just do this all out, throw this as hard as I can. Because, right, I played next to someone who was just like lost their head when it came to practicing her games and wanted to go all out all the time. And it was the difference of like being able to just field a nice and easy ground ball and throw it to first versus fielding it as hard as they could, throwing it as hard as they could, having no touch on a ball. You're almost like a little bit of an out of control athlete at that point. So again, and it's too, like, people are going to see the title and be like, what do you mean? Like, of course you need like passion and emotion. And it's not, again, we're not saying you have to be a robot on the field. We're just saying like that cannot be what trumps how you actually go out and play the game. It cannot be the end all be all. That's like, well, that's the only thing I'm going to ride off of now. I'm not going to think, I'm just going to go. So I think that really is the biggest delaying factor. So we don't make this bonehead play when it matters the most, let's say.
Yeah. The athletes, you can study any athlete who is cool in the clutch. You can look at a Derek Jeter. By the way, he's a really good commentator. I didn't think he would be as good as he really is.
I haven't heard him yet, but I haven't. Yeah. Okay. I'll have to check him out.
Yeah. But looking at Derek Jeter, right? For example, I'll use Brady as an example. I'll use Mahomes as an example right now, current day NFL. Those guys remain cool in the clutch, and you can just tell by their body language. It's tough to decipher. I'll throw that to you because it's tough. I have ideas, but I'm not a coach. But I have ideas as to what makes their body language, what tells you based off their body language that they're cool in the clutch. But what do you look at as an athlete, from an athlete, from your standpoint as a coach, when they're cool in the clutch like that? What kind of body language signs are they exhibiting?
So I will start with the face, and I'll use a hitter as an example, but I notice tension in their face is very low. So it's almost like their eyes look a little relaxed. And it's not even that they're taking deep breaths, but their lips are a little parted. They're not clenched, and there's no ticking at the jaw. It's just their face looks relaxed. And then all of a sudden, whether you can actually see it, it's not too extreme, but like their traps are then relaxed. And it's very bizarre because you're almost witnessing someone be even more relaxed than they would have been in like a practice situation. They are just immersed in this pandemonium of like excitement, and yet they look so contrasted to what is actually happening. So I noticed that. And then even their takes are very like, it's not harsh. It's not, oh man, okay, I almost had that one. It's like a soft take. And that becomes so, when you see like, I think it was Derek Jeter's last at bat. Like, he almost looked so intimidating for how calm he was right before he hit last at bat at Yankee Stadium. He hit that opposite field ball to score the game-winning run. And that doesn't mean he didn't celebrate afterwards and he didn't get excited, but just like at the plate, it almost gave you goosebumps how contrasting he looked to the environment. And so I read a book called Clutch. And one of the things it talked about is like, listen, people are going to have clutch moments, but to be a clutch athlete, it's you have that all the time. And you're not thinking, man, I'm about to hit this ball and it's going to win us the game and I'm going to be in the Hall of Fame one day. It's just literally, it's like, whoop, this pitch, I've practiced and worked so hard at just being one pitch at a time. And they gave the example of A-Rod, how he might have had some clutch moments, but he was never truly consistently clutch in the playoffs, probably because his ego had him thinking of being a Hall of Famer, being the guy, and certainly when you hear him talk, that comes out every now and then, where you hear some of these other guys and that maybe probably wasn't that big of a concern for them when they were at that at-bat at that time.
Yeah, it's amazing, looking back on A-Rod, who had a tremendous career. It is really amazing to watch a guy be so successful in the regular season, but then almost like a flip of a switch outside of 2009.
I'll say 09. Yep.
Really struggle in the postseason. And you could see all the body language features that you just talked about. They were all prevalent in Alex Rodriguez at that time. The face, you could just tell the face was very tense. The traps, he looked like he was very stiff in his stance. And on contrast with Derek Jeter, everything was always just very loose. You know who else was very loose, by the way, speaking about that, the old Yankees, was Tino Martinez, too, in those situations. You can tell, looking back on it now, the body language, everything was just still very loose at the plate. The moment was not too big for him at Yankee Stadium during the postseason.
We always said that was like the telltale sign, was that an athlete, like as an athlete, you want to be, that you never want a moment to be bigger than you.
Yeah.
And the only time you start to let a moment get bigger than you is when you start to, again, think about the bookends of that moment, like what led up to that moment, what could potentially happen after that moment. But if you've been so practiced in the present, that's all you operate with. Michael Phelps is another one. People joked about like his like pre approach to the pool routine, how like everyone else is jumping up and down and do it, and he's kind of just like, all right, I'm just jaw relaxed. He's just ready to rock and roll. So there is something to it. And listen, we have access to YouTube at our fingertips. Like, go watch athletes in clutch moments and see for yourself if you can start to pick up on some of those things.
Yeah. And be sure to, of course, if you're on YouTube, watch the show, and watch clips from previous episodes as well. Now, let me ask you from a concrete perspective now, at the academy, how do you get practices? How do you write up practices or plan practices to where athletes don't get too hyped and they don't practice with too much heart? That's, again, our topic today. But they get athletes to practice the right way as a coach.
You know what? I think it comes down to a lot of letting the athlete know the intent behind what we're doing sometimes. So that is going to help them improve their smarts a little bit surrounding situations. For our baseball athletes, in particular, our pitchers, they know when it's a velo pen where we are purely just focusing on how hard, like this, the purpose of this bullpen is to just see if we can max out our throw. But then we have pitch accuracy pens, we have pitch design pens, we have all these different things. And then finally we have, come the end of their season, we have an all-encompassing bullpen where it's like, okay, now you're facing a live hitter. Now it's not just as hard as you, now we're putting this all together. So there's ways we can train different aspects so that if they are an athlete that needs to just let it go, they have opportunities to. As far as hitters go, I think I have a hard time being able to replicate moments that might bring out an athlete to just default, I'm going to go right to heart instead of worrying about smart. So I try to create situations or create environments. Maybe I bring the pocket radar out and I say, okay, we're gonna see how hard we can hit this, and we'll start to see who gets that tension and starts to just go all out instead of an athlete who's like still working on the relaxed flow and the whip. Or we'll do like a situational hitting type thing. Anyway, there's so many different scenarios you can either test the athlete and then use that as a teaching moment, take a step back and be like, okay, cool. How did we feel? What did you feel start taking over? Did you feel like you could still keep your head, try to expose them to those small things in a safe place they feel safe. There's no college coaches watching you here. There's no stands. There's no lights on. And then hopefully they can take that learning experience and then bring that to the field with them.
I want to say this too, about, again, today's topic, when you're playing with heart. I'm not a big believer in, when coaches say, well, this is a controlled environment and this isn't. I think every moment for an athlete in general can be a controlled environment if you have the right mental mindset. And I think when you take out the whole playing with heart scenario and you continue to play smart, again, don't play with heart, play smart. When you play smart and execute your plan, Now you're in a controlled environment. I don't believe that, hey, you have to be perfect in this environment because this is a controlled environment. Like, for example, you have to hit 10 line drives right up the middle in the batting cage because this is a controlled environment. You can do that on the field as well in batting practice. You can do that in a game where you can hit line drives. It's harder, certainly, but if you create your own environment, I believe, as an athlete, and coaches can help you with that. But when you play with heart, you're diminishing your chances of creating your own environment, and thus you're diminishing your chances of controlling the narrative, controlling what is going on around you, controlling that moment. And that's what athletes need to do to be successful. They need to be able to control that moment in a controlled environment. It's
fair. Yeah. It's certainly managed. It's like falls into that managing emotions aspect, and you're never going to make it to the next level. You will just constantly be limited by your ability to do this. So, you might be a great player in some situations, but if you have not developed this emotional maturity, all of a sudden your ability to showcase how good you are in pressure situations or in bigger situations is going to be diminished unless you get this an under wraps type thing, or start playing over and over in your head these moments, moment maybe where you did just rely on heart and how it could have been different. You'll continue to look like that freshman on a field instead of the more mature athlete you want to be.
Yeah. And we've talked about managing emotions in previous episodes. So go back in the archives, the catalog, Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube, the Softball Strength Academy YouTube page. Do you have anything coming up before we wrap up today?
Just trying to continue. We're adding to our Instagram every day. We will be adding to the drill library come Black Friday. So that'll be on what we're working on the next month. So be on the lookout for that. And then just hunkering down for our off season. Winter is coming.
Yeah. Are you prepared for Halloween yet? Halloween's coming.
As in any decorations picked out? No, we did. We are lagging a little bit.
I saw some Christmas lights when I was driving through the city the other day. And I thought, already, huh? Okay.
Well, I'll tell you what, my grandpa is my grandpa has always loved Christmas. He grew up in an orphanage, never had one, and always said, if I ever get a house of my own one day, it's going to be decked out. And that's what he's always done. 11 years ago, when my grandma passed away, he was like, that's it. I'm going to have all my Christmas lights done by her birthday, which is October 5th. So not only does he go all out, he does it all out by October 5th. And it looks great. If you're ever in Rockland County in Japan, go check out my grandpa's Christmas lights.
Yeah. All right. Next week, episode 59, talking about overcoming athletes' overthinking. Be a very good topic as well. Again, if you have any questions, email us as well, jimbopodcast21@gmail.com, and we will talk to you next week. Take care, everybody.